Hey, what is up, mortals? It is. Welcome to Season 2 Part 4 of What If Deku Could Use 100% of One for All. I just wanted to greet you guys by just saying, sit back and relax, you're in for a treat. So, we begin. The unfiltered sunlight shined in through the room's open windows, lighting up the shadows that clung desperately to the room's corners, but leaving the mood that hung in the air otherwise unbothered. Midoriya sat with his scarred hands resting idly in his lap while, across from him, Aizawa sat with a majority of the class all gathered around the two of them in silence. The green-haired hero looked up to meet Aizawa's hard gaze with his own, emerald hues meeting ebony. Just for a second, the two stared at one another in perfect silence before Midoriya chose that moment to speak. We can't just keep sitting around here and waiting. Someone's got to do something to get Bakugo back, he would exclaim. We will, we just have to figure out what. Reports have already started coming in stating Shigaraki has all for one. He is extremely dangerous. And there's always the chance he could take your quirk, Midoriya, he said, looking at the young boy. He frowned and shook his head vigorously. No, you heard what All Might said. As long as I don't want him to have it, he can't take it, no matter what, he exclaimed. I know what he said, but you know as well as I do how unpredictable that quirk is. If he were to take one for all, the hero society as a whole would be doomed, he said solemnly. Midoriya stood up, turning before storming out of the room. If no one was going to do anything, he'd have to do something, because if he didn't, the world as they know it could possibly change forever. Meanwhile, Shigaraki was a king on a throne, surrounded by the people that saw him seated upon it. Recently twice had received contact from the young head of the Shai Hasaki, a young boy by the name of Overhaul, a relatively tall, slender young man dressed formally in a dress shirt, tie, and fur-collared coat and the red and gold plague doctor's mask that was his trademark. So you're the one who took all for one's power? Huh. The new Prince of Darkness thought you'd be taller, Overhaul said, staring at him impassively. Shigaraki narrowed his eyes, but otherwise continued to hear the man on. Overhaul looked around at the people around him. Mr. Compress, Toga, Magni, and finally twice they had lost Moonfish, Muscular, and Spinner in the ensuing conflict in the forest. However, their prize sat chained in a nearby chair. The aforementioned atomic blonde sat by the professional hero and member of the Pussycats, Ragdoll. She was still unconscious, but Bakugo had woken up an hour prior and remained silent, merely glaring at them. You know, it wasn't until recently that word got out that All for One was real. Everyone my age thought he was a myth, a legend that died years before All Might decided to throw him into the ocean. Sad really. I'd have liked to meet the man behind all this, Overhaul said. Well, he isn't, and I'm here to take his place now, Shigaraki said bitterly, glaring at the Yakuza frontrunner. I see, and I think right there is where you have an issue. If you have this many people, you need a plan. A goal without a plan, after all, is only a wish. I'm willing to take all of you under my wing, and I'll show you how to truly set a plan into motion, Overhaul said brazenly. Magni, agitated by the young frontrunner's forwardness, suddenly sprang forward. Work under you? No thanks, sweetheart. A friend once told me, you're your own person, never stoop to working under someone, always work with them, or if you can have them work for you. She is a kind and gentle soul, a true saint, and I'll be damned if I work for some poo. Pulling Overhaul forward, she brought the magnet she held down atop his head simultaneously as he dragged a single finger down her arm. Suddenly, her flesh would pulse before suddenly bulging at the seams, and the woman was suddenly reduced to a chunky mist that filled the room with an explosive splat. Big sis Mag, Toga would exclaim, and they all stared on in horror. Reacting immediately, Compress leapt from where he sat but was dwarfed in speed by the much faster Shigaraki. Overhaul's eyes widened as Overhaul raised a hand to defend, only for Shigaraki to find himself in front of a nameless Yakuza thug who he reduced to dust immediately with a touch. Bursting through the man's ruined body, he seized a hold of Overhaul's face and arm in hand. A blue glow emanated from his hands as his golden, bird-like eyes rolled back in his head. Shigaraki had robbed not only Overhaul of his quirk, but his life. The wall behind him burst open to reveal several other Yakuza just as Overhaul was reduced to dust in Shigaraki's hands. Overhaul looked up at the group, who stared in horror at the sudden and violent death of their leader. If any of you want to escape the fate of your leader, you'd be good to bow to the next reigning king of darkness, Tamura Shigaraki. I won't be walked on by some obsolete Yakuza, Shigaraki stated. Twice. Show the Yakuza where they'll be placed, Shigaraki said, walking across the warehouse. He touched two fingers to the half of Magna's body that laid out on the ground. As suddenly as she had died, she was together again, sitting and staring at her hands in shock and then up at Shigaraki. Toga squealed in delight, dashing across the warehouse before seizing Magni in a tight embrace. Bakugo grit his teeth before bellowing, "Let me out so I can kick your ass, you bastard." A sly smile crossed Shigaraki's lips. Slowly he walked past Toga, sobbing against Magna's shoulder, approaching the steaming Bakugo, who bit and struggled against his restraints. By now Ragdoll had begun to stir. catching Shigaraki's attention for the moment despite Bakugo's screaming. Your quirk interests me, Ragdoll, Shigaraki said. The woman's eyes fluttered slightly, opening to about halfway up before Shigaraki suddenly seized her by the face. Tears ran in thick streams down her face as the same eerie blue glow emanated from his hand, and, just like Overhaul, her quirk was no more. Her eyes widened before, suddenly, her face would dim and darken to a shade of gray in his palm, cracks splintering the surface of her face into several pieces before her body crumbled away to dust in his hand. You're more useful to me alive than you know, Katsuki. I can finally kill that pesky brat that got me put away. And all for one killed, Shigaraki stated. Before we get back into the story, I would like to say that we've got a second channel called Anime Deep Dive. Anime Deep Dive is a channel based on a variety of anime lore. If you are interested in content like this, make sure you click the icon on the top right corner or check the description below for a link to the channel. Now, with that out of the way, let's get back into the story. Midoriya had been in the process of pulling on his green hero's suit when All Might appeared in his shriveled, emaciated form in the doorway, staring at the young, messy green-haired boy with sadness ruminating in his eyes. If I had known that doing that to All for One would have led to this, I would have never gone there in the first place, he said, guilt evident in his tone. It's not your fault, All Might. You did what you thought was right, and I have one for all now, so it's up to me to beat Shigaraki. Deku said, I've got to make this right, Midoriya. If not, he'll kill you and the rest of the world, and I can't have that weight on my shoulders. All Might said, frowning. All Might, wait, Midoriya called. By then All Might had turned and walked away, leaving Midoriya in his wake as he quickly exited the dorms before vanishing. Like a puppy running after its master, Midoriya ran after All Might. As he ran, he noticed how the tall towers and skyscrapers of Musutafu quickly turned into smaller, older dilapidated houses. Still with no sight of All Might, he broke off to the side and ran in between a series of houses that bordered a warehouse that sat still directly in the center of the district. He thought he saw the blonde ends of All Might's hair as he entered a door. Running after him, he was only met with an old door. Confused, the young hero wandered around the warehouse before climbing up and taking a seat on the brick wall that stood tall at the side of the warehouse. Peering in through the windows, he barely registered the image of All Might as he entered the building. He looked like he was talking to someone. And who was that someone? Midoriya squinted his eyes and leaned forward. Then he paused, cold. It was Shigaraki. All Might stared sadly at Shigaraki as he sat, staring at the broken old man indifferently from his throne. To his right sat Toby, with Compress looming over her and Magni staring daggers at the former symbol of peace, while Twice sat twiddling his thumbs. Shigaraki averted his eyes from his friends and followers before turning them to stare at All Might. I'm surprised, All Might of all people. Here to do what? Your power's gone, given to that brat that got me locked away and All for One killed by you. Have you come here to apologize? To beg for your life, for young Bakugo's? Shigaraki questioned. All Might sadly looked over at the atomic blonde who sat, mouth wide in shock at the sight of All Might standing before Shigaraki. Please, Tamura. You know as well as I do Nana wouldn't want this for you, for him, for any of us. I did what I had to do to save you as much as the world. That man was evil. He was grooming you to become him. All Might pleaded. Shigaraki scoffed. Nana was never around. She wasn't there when my dear dad beat me for wanting to become a hero. She was out, being a hero while I sat alone in my room, crying. My power, All for One, they were a gift. He took me in when I had no one. He gave me something I never had growing up. Hope for something beyond what I grew up around. Shigaraki said. All for One killed Nana, Tamura. Did he ever tell you that? She wasn't ever around because he had killed her. She was your grandmother and my mentor. Please, T. Shigaraki shot up from his seat with a snarl. Don't patronize me, All Might. He did what he had to do to protect me, to make me stronger. Now all that stands between me and that power is you, All Might. And that brat with your annoying power. Shigaraki said. Stepping forward, he grabbed the shriveled man by the throat. He grabbed and clawed at Shigaraki's fingers, but it was too late. With a simple flex of his hand, All Might's neck jerked to the side with a violent, viscous snap before his body crumbled to dust in his hand. By then Midoriya was sobbing openly. Thick, snotty tears running down his cheeks as he had watched his friend, mentor, and father figure crumble to dust before his eyes. He screamed, and screamed some more. Lightning crawled up his skin before, in a single push of his fist, a violent gust of air pressure reduced the warehouse to splinters. Standing amongst the rubble stood the League of Villains, and their leader. A wide smile plastered on his chapped lips. In one hand he held the struggling Bakugo, with the other hand looking dangerously close to the atomic blonde's neck. You took my master away from me. I only thought it fair to take that and a little more from you, Midoriya. Shigaraki said, extending his hand. Much to Midoriya's horror, he watched in silence with tears streaming down his face as he enclosed Bakugo's face in his palm, all 5 fingers touching down before. Suddenly, he erupted in a violent explosion that sent Shigaraki flying and left Bakugo standing there. "Don't touch me, you freak," Bakugo shouted. Kaken, Midoriya yelled, came sprinting to Bakugo's side just as Shigaraki stood up from the rubble, glaring daggers at the both of them. "You'll never hurt Kaken, as long as I live," Midoriya yelled. "We'll see about that." Little brother, thank you all for sticking around, and I hope that you enjoyed. Before you leave, we would just like to let you know that We the Celestials has many other channels for your entertainment and viewing purposes. All the information you'll need is right below here in the description, so feel free to check out all the other incredible projects our team creates. Secondly, on behalf of We the Celestials, I'd like to thank everyone involved in the production of today's awesome content. Their details will be in the description below. That's all for today's video, so goodbye and have a divine day.